Many argue that homework is not all that important in the grand scheme of things. Research actually shows it has little to no beneficial effect on learning. But of course, the independent and organization of schoolwork at home is absolutely helpful in building habits, and it is important to practice skills learned. But for many kids who think and learn differently, homework can be a struggle. And my guest today says it is not worth sacrificing important family time and certainly not your relationship with your child. My guest today is Josh Horwatt. He is an educational therapist and founder of Beyond Board Educational Services. He specializes in working with kids with dyslexia and kids who are highly resistant to intervention. Beyond Board provides specialized tutoring for kids who are bored and detached from school using an approach called connection tutoring. Josh is also the father of 3 children, and he says he's a bad but avid surfer. I can't wait for you to join our conversation.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Karen. This is exciting to be here.
I'm so excited that you're here too. And one of the tricks of podcasting is that we're recording over the summer, but we're going to air it for back to school because it's such an important time.
Okay, so we'll pretend that it's the end of the summer right now.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it's such a great summer.
Right, it was amazing. All the trips and the kids are ready for school.
Oh, yes. Yes, and there were no delays in flights or anything. It was
nothing.
Perfect.
And COVID is gone and everything is perfect. The world is returned to perfection.
I love that. So again, when we air this episode, students will be heading back to school after summer break, which, we love. But what that means for a lot of students is a return to homework. And anytime I do evaluations with kids, parents are always talking about homework, and it's usually not in a positive way. And I don't want to get into a debate over whether students should have homework or whether they shouldn't have homework. But I do want to talk about what is reasonable and what are some expectations that families should set regarding homework.
Yeah, I hear that. Homework is an unfortunate part of schooling. And I agree with you. And I think that there is a lot to talk about the efficacy and the necessity of homework. But we could skip that. But I do think it's worth noting this before we get into the conversation of how to approach homework with your kid. Homework is a kind of intrusion into your life. After a 6 or 8 hour day in school, you have to come home and do more school on your own. And for some families and some kids, that's also the worst part of the whole thing. That's where all the fighting takes place, where all the frustration takes place. It's a challenge for a lot of families. And even for families that it's not a challenge, your kid is now sitting for another half hour, 2 hours, working on something when they could and maybe should be outside playing or running around or doing other things with their minds and their bodies.
And I think that's so important because every family's experience is going to be different around homework. I've got 2 kids at home where one rushes in and wants to get it out of the way and does it as soon as she walks in the door. And then my son, it's like he'll put it off until he absolutely has to do it and actually hopes that we forget. But one of the things you coach parents on and teach kids to say is it's just homework. What do you mean by that?
Okay, good. So I think taking your kids is a great example and a place to start. Kids at different ages and different stages, homework means something different to them, okay? So for your kid who's in high school, homework is a little bit more important. It factors into their grades, it factors into their GPA, and that has an impact on what happens to them after school or after they finish high school. So they may need to take homework more seriously. But for kids in elementary school, up until 6th grade, to be quite frank and honest, the homework doesn't really matter that much. And I think that there's a pretty good body of research that shows also that homework doesn't really matter that much. It doesn't help kids learn more. There may be certain subjects where they need to practice a little bit, but as you and I both know as parents and as practitioners, that if your mind is not engaged in what you're doing, you're not really getting anything out of it in a learning task. So if your kid is just running through it, nothing much is happening. So let's talk about what's the right approach for this.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So getting to it's just homework. I don't know what you're like as a mom doing homework with your kids. Do you have a certain approach with them? Are you like, we got to get it all done kind of mom, or how do you go about it?
It depends on the homework. Like you're saying, is this going to be part of their grade? If obviously they're doing a report, they've got like a book report that they have to do and they're turning it in, then that's going to be important. But if it's, my son, for example, when he started 2nd grade, had to write spelling words 3 times.
Yeah.
I'm not going to prioritize that.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Right. And sometimes what they have to do and the level of frustration is at the whim of a teacher who doesn't know what it's like for this kid to get it done at home. Okay. So I think the first thing that a parent needs to do or a practitioner needs to do is they need to check their own expectations around homework. They need to look into themselves and say, what am I like working with somebody and doing homework with them? Am I a stickler? Like, I'll be honest, I've worked with kids before and I've found myself like, no, your name is spelled badly, right? Or like you put the date in the wrong place. And like before we've even started, I'm already criticizing them. And then I find myself like, no, this is wrong. Let's redo it. And then we spend 10 minutes on one problem. And I realized like I just created the worst situation possible for a kid around homework. So any parent practitioner needs to look at what are you going into this with? And that's where it's just homework comes in. We need to remember that this is just homework. For kids up until middle school, it's really something, it's part of the game they have to play, but it's not that important. It doesn't have any bearing on their life. So let's step back and let's look at it for what it is. It needs to get done. And that's about it. I know it gets more complicated. You see that your kid's really struggling with something. There's an important assignment. There's always those things. But your day-to-day homework just needs to get done. And so with that, I have kind of an approach that I use with my own kids and with the students that I work with. And the approach is like this. So first, I have a discussion with the child. What kind of support do they want? Do they want me to help them? Do they want me to look it over? Do they want me to correct it afterwards? Or do they want me to just sit there and be quiet while they finish their homework? So the first thing I do is I ask for their consent to help. And then I ask them what level of help they want. And once this has been established, it's so much more relaxed. Because they know I'm not going to be sitting there like correcting every little thing they get wrong. I'm not going to tell them to go back and fix that. Then my next expectation for homework is just get it done. So I'll have a conversation with them. We'll say, okay, let's take all of your assignments. And then there is a way that we structure it. Let's take the hardest stuff first, or let's take the most difficult one. Okay. And let's look at it and let's say, how long should this take us? Or how long are we willing to spend on it? And if it's a big math assignment or something, we'll say 20 minutes, and that's the max. And then we'll go about doing it the way that the kid wants it done. And after 20 minutes, that's it. Okay. Like put it away, even if it's not finished, because it's just homework. It's not worth spending 40 minutes. It's not worth spending 60 minutes, especially when there's other things on their plate. So a few things here. One is when we're talking about younger grades, we should be setting very short amounts of time for them to be doing homework, right? 20 to 30 minutes at the most, right? Up until fourth grade, third grade, maybe. And then, between fourth and sixth, you can add a little bit more time. In middle school, the homework load goes up. You got to spend a little bit more time on it. Now you're spending around an hour if that's what your school is assigning. And then high school is high school. High school is going to be more of a slog. But what I would say is is that our goal for what we're doing with this, it's just homework and asking for consent and just getting it done. What we're doing is we're building independent learners. So between first grade and sixth grade, who cares if they did their homework really well? What we want to know is that by sixth grade, that kid can open their bag, take care of their homework, ask for the help they need, know that they have help if they want it, know that they don't have help if they don't want it, know that there's not going to be fighting and anxiety over it, and they develop their own standards and independent approach towards it. And I think that's probably the best thing that we could ask for with our kids.
And I think that's really important. One of the things you said is really about developing independence, because I think so much of the exercise of doing homework is helping kids to develop those skills as opposed to learning new material. What they're going to learn, they're learning in the classroom, but you're really helping them to develop work ethic and homework ethic and helping them to, again, develop independence as learners. Which brings me to a couple things that you said and I have questions about. And it sounds like we shouldn't be encouraging, as parents, insisting that kids finish all their homework, because I'm thinking about those kids who the teacher says you shouldn't be spending more than 30 minutes. And after an hour and a half, they're still not done. And I always tell parents that they should first communicate with teachers about how long it's taking your child to finish this work, but not insisting that kids finish all of that work if it's not being done in an acceptable amount of time.
Yeah. Most teachers, like when I've come across this situation with kids, and I'll have the parents ask the teacher, how long should this kid spend on homework? Most teachers are super reasonable. And I'll be like, no, don't spend more than 20 minutes. Very rarely you'll get a teacher who's like not reasonable. Or more often, the parents aren't reasonable. The parents have these hangups about homework. It's got to get done or something terrible is going to happen.
That is true. And sometimes that almost feels like a reflection on the parent. If I let you go to school with your homework not completed, what does that say about me as a parent?
Yeah, absolutely. Or like, no, this is how we got to get homework done. They're like holding on to this like it's some sacred cow, but why? So yeah, definitely asking the teacher about timing and then just being willing once the time is up, even if your kid didn't spend every second focused on their work, just let it go. That'll teach them an important lesson too. And over time, if you're able to step out of the process and let the kid do it on their own, what they'll do is they'll start developing that. They'll feel like that's an independence habit and an adult habit. But if you're sitting over their head, haranguing them and telling them you fix this and do this, they're going to start seeing homework as a child thing. And they're going to start seeing it as a negative thing. And they're going to learn to hide from it. And they're going to learn to hide from you.
Right. And then the other thing you say is they learn to lie about it. It's like, no, I don't have homework, or it sits in the backpack. No, I don't have any today, because they know that taking it out and maybe struggling with it and having to do it over an extended period of time and having these high expectations from parents regarding just getting it done can create a lot of anxiety and stress for kids where homework is problematic.
Yeah. And the fallout that I see sometimes in families over something as dumb as homework is devastating. And it just should not exist in a family that your relationship with your child is jeopardized over homework. So that's going back to it. It's like I have some families repeat that mantra and some students repeat that mantra every time I'm there. It's just homework. Like, let's not get too crazy about this. There's more important things.
And like you're saying, the relationship with your child is most important. So if you're having significant struggles around homework and it's causing problems in the family, it's not worth sacrificing that family relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess to reiterate kind of what I said is like, set up in your head as a parent or as a practitioner when you're working with your kid, like set up the expectation for how long and communicate that to them so they know how long they're going to be at this. Ask them what kind of support they want. And then I think this is the most important thing. If your kid did their homework and you look down and they did everything wrong, don't have them redo it. Don't correct it. Don't make them go back through that process. That's the thing that kills them. Make note of it. And if you feel like it's necessary, send an email to the teacher and let the teacher know that, they really don't understand this and they need some help. Or if you have that relationship with them, not during homework time, but some other time that's appropriate, bring up that subject and work with them on it. Or tell their tutor that they need to work on it. But not during homework time. Like make homework time start and end after whatever, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, but then it ends.
And it's really important to tie in what you're saying about the consent from your child and having an understanding of the level of support that they want from you. Because, if I think about a child who goes through a page of homework and it's all wrong, if at the beginning they said, I just want you to look at the first 3 to make sure I understand it, then they could avoid making those mistakes for the 30 or 40 minutes that they're doing the exercise. And that's why having those expectations early on is very important. But then that student who says, oh, I got this, and then they make all the errors, they also learn from that.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that consent piece is huge because there's some other bigger things happening around that too. Kids don't always know how to ask for help in other situations because they don't know what kind of help they need. But kids are usually pretty good about understanding what kind of help they need in homework. That is a situation they understand pretty well. So when you ask them to formulate what kind of help they want or need, you are teaching them to kind of reflect and think for themselves what kind of approach they want to take. And there will be times when your kid just wants to be lazy about it and get it done and not have any help or intervention. And there will be times when there are important things that they really want a lot of help on with you. And it's important to allow them, to give them the tools to be able to differentiate between those kinds of situations.
And I can see that so clearly in both of my kids in terms of the level of support that they want. And they do learn from that because you see over time that changes and you see the growth. And a lot of parents that I work with say that they also see that growth where, their kids don't want them to intervene. And then they feel comfortable enough to ask for the support that they do need.
Yeah.
I think about my daughter who comes to me and says, I wrote this draft, and she'll send me a Google document for me to review for her, where my son will just do his work and put it in his backpack and not want any input.
And that's amazing because when they trust that you're not gonna stick your nose in their business every time they pull out their homework, they'll be a lot more trusting about coming to you and asking you for help when they need it too.
Yes. And I think encouraging them to, if you need help, for them to know that they can go to you if they need help is reassuring in and of itself.
Yeah.
Without kind of being a helicopter parent, like sitting over them as they're writing that first, line of homework and pointing out the spelling error in that, second word. Right?
Erase your name. We got to start all over again. Oh my God. Yeah. I'm reliving trauma from my own childhood too. And at the same time, I'm doing the same thing. So yeah, I really have to live by these principles and remind myself as well with my own kids, with my students, because not all of us, but some of us have a really bad relationship with homework and we're repeating the cycle with our own kids.
Right. And I think it's important too to keep in mind, we work a lot here with with kids who think and learn differently, and for kids with attention issues, for kids with reading struggles, language-based learning disorders, math disorders. Homework can be a hard time for them because, again, like you're saying, they've spent the whole day at school, and for some it's been really hard. And then you have to come home and do your 20, 30, 40 minutes of homework.
Yeah.
And it is also hard. It is still hard. And being able to be flexible as parents seems important in terms of giving your kids time to relax after school, to take a break. And even if they start homework, they don't have to sit at the table to do 30 minutes of homework all at once. They can take breaks as they need it. So I think for parents to be flexible, and also, again, that important piece of conveying information to the teacher as appropriate regarding what homework looks like, because the teachers can get the end result, that report, that page of math problems, but not know what had to go into, the child, what had to happen at home in order to get that one sheet of math homework complete.
Oh my God. Yeah, for sure. And that was a really important point that you made, that our kids who are neurodivergent, who are struggling with school in any kind of way, sometimes by the time they get home, I mean, we know it. And the parents who have kids like this, they know that sometimes their kids have been holding it together all day because the last thing they want to do is embarrass themselves at school. And when they get home, like, they just need that time and space to decompress. But here's another responsibility on their shoulders. So yeah, I totally hear that. And I think you reminded me of something else really important, is that communication with your teachers is super important. I mean, I know so many parents who go through this struggle and have never thought to let the teacher know what's going on and just say, hey, this is how we're doing it, because my kid is done by the time they get home, and they just need to decompress, and it's a huge fight every night over homework, and it's just not worth it. So we do the best we can. That's why this homework is coming back half completed, but I would just want to let you know that we're on it, and we know this is why it's happening, and that usually goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I think the teachers can also help with prioritizing what should get done. When you talk about developing a strategy around homework, if kids are coming home with 3 different things that they need to do, the teachers can often help you determine what should be a priority when homework is a struggle.
Yeah. And you'll see some teachers are fantastic. Once they know what's going on, they'll modify the homework for the kid. They'll circle the most important things for them to do. Like, they'll take so much off their plate. And I've seen it really change the way that kids feel about doing the homework, and they feel a lot more empowered to do it independently, because it's, when they take it out, they know it's not going to be overwhelming.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing that we have to keep in mind for our neurodivergent kids is that they have homework, but oftentimes they also need support in other areas. They may need to work with an educational therapist to develop key skills, to address areas of weakness, learning disorders, and homework comes on top of that work that they do. And so do you have any recommendations for parents whose kids, I see this a lot with parents who say, my kids is doing speech twice a week. They're in speech therapy twice a week. They're seeing an educational therapist 3 times a week. And then we have homework.
Yeah.
What do you recommend for families in that situation?
Yeah, that's a really challenging one. So here's a challenge as an ed therapist. You go to a kid and you want to work on something with them that's going to have long-term value for them and the way that they learn and process. But that might not always, but then once you're finished with them, they're left with a lot of homework. Mm-hmm. And they after, working hard with you, they then got to pull out their homework and do it. So I always think this is where communication comes back. I think that the first thing to do is to communicate with the teacher to see what their expectations are. And a lot of times teachers will say that it's okay, if they're working on something, especially if they know who the ed therapist is and, there's communication between the ed therapist and the teacher. They know that they're working with an ed therapist on Wednesdays, then they can be excused from homework on Wednesdays. That's a great solution. Sometimes that's not practical. You're in middle school, you're in high school, there's things going on, there's projects you got to work on. So that in that case, I think the practitioner has to be really cognizant of the load that they're leaving the kid with and plan for that. If you can incorporate that into your session, then I would say put that on the practitioner to do that. You don't want to leave your kid with more frustration. If you can't do that, if that's just simply not possible, then I think that you really need to look at when you're scheduled, how you're scheduled, and the order that you do things. So if you know that homework is going to be a huge fight after you leave, maybe you want to have it so that the kid does their homework first, and then you don't get the optimal time. Like maybe you're working with them, instead of working with them at 4 to 5, you're working with them from 6 to 7, which is not optimal, but you're also preventing, this horrible situation from taking place after you leave. Those are a few approaches, but communication is really key to it. It helps so much when teachers know.
And that's really helpful. I tell parents all the time that, again, the teachers will not know the load that your kids have outside of school if you don't tell them. Yeah. And they won't know that your kids are struggling with homework if you don't tell them. And like you said, most teachers will be flexible in their approach. They'll be understanding. They'll modify homework as needed. And again, it starts with a conversation. So that communication is so important.
Yeah. And this is an interesting thing because I know a lot of ed therapists, like me personally, I'm against doing homework, or I used to be against doing homework with kids because I felt like you want to get your money's worth. We should be working on skills that this kid needs. And then what I realized is that sometimes for families that had no clue how to approach homework, this approach was so beneficial to the kid and so beneficial to them that it was worth their money to do the homework in this way. So maybe if you're a practitioner and you're seeing that your kid is struggling with homework and you have a great approach, or you want to try this out and model it for the family, that might be one of the greatest gifts you can give them, because homework's going to stick with them for years. So if you can teach them how to get through it without fighting and struggling, that's worth something.
Absolutely. And the other thing that comes to mind as you say that is that often will preserve the parent's relationship with the child when that tutoring support, that homework tutor, that role is taken over by someone other than a parent.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, it's good to know when as a parent you fail at that. And that's okay. It's okay. It's like
absolutely okay.
Yeah. There are things that I can do with my clients that I can't do with my own kids. And I'll call up one of my tutors and say, can you work with my daughter on math? Because it's just going to be easier for her to learn it from you than to learn it from me. And that's okay. It's okay to say, I need help, and hire the right person. And that's also, one of the things that are out there is that, you don't necessarily need your ed therapist to be doing homework. You could be looking for kind of like the right tutoring experience where they could do that with them and hopefully teach them to be independent as well, and not be overly helpful. But yeah, knowing when to ask for help is really good too.
And you and your team use this approach called connection tutoring. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that is so important when you talk about tutoring with the relationship that you have with a child.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll preface this. My first kid that I ever had as an ed therapist was also my most challenging kid, but the kid I learned the most from. And just to give you a little anecdote, I used to come over and he would be frustrated. And he was like the youngest of like 7 or 8 kids. And he couldn't communicate well. So the way he would communicate his frustration is he would take a hose from outside and he would spray down his whole house inside with the hose, including his parents, who just didn't know what to do with him. That was a lot to be thrown into with like your first client. But I kind of understood the kid, and eventually what we figured out was learning was really difficult for him. And it still is to this day. This was years ago, but he loved gardening. He liked that hose, and he liked lawnmowers and blowers. And so we kind of like worked together and created a little business for him. And he's graduating high school now. He still has that business. And he makes like $3,000 a month from gardening his neighbor's lawns. Yeah. It's pretty good. Like his homework is still a disaster. He's not the greatest student, but he got through and he's got business, and he has so much pride and self-confidence. And that for me was like the essence of what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. That's what I want to be doing. And when I come into a client, or when I have a tutor go into a client, sometimes our goal is just academic, to help with chemistry or help with homework. But it's really about connecting with somebody, and it's really about seeing the person that you're sitting across from and helping that person, instead of seeing it as like math problems that we got to get through. So that's the essence of connection tutoring, is that I look for really special tutors who have like super high EQ. I don't really care about their academic credentials. Obviously they have academic credentials, but I don't care that if they came from Harvard or Stanford. I'm not hiring from top-notch schools. I'm hiring great people, and then teach them how to relate to kids really well using things that I've learned over my years of doing this, and help them, bring those kids to become more independent and be able to find some joy in learning, hopefully, or at least reconcile themselves to the fact that they can do it and it's not as bad as they think it is, and make peace with the whole schooling experience.
And I love that, creating a joy in learning. And again, with the focus, and when you do that, the focus is not on the outcome. It's not on how many problems you got correct on that worksheet. It's about instilling the joy in learning and building that self-confidence, which is so important and critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much so.
Josh, any last tips for parents to keep in mind as they transition back to school? Because kids will have had the whole summer with no homework.
Yeah.
And now they'll be faced with homework again. Any final tips for parents to help with this transition back to school?
Oh God, let's see. Take it slow. Let the transition happen slow, and remember that there's stages in this whole thing. So like your first week back, they're going to be so diligent in doing their homework, and then it's going to start to drop off. And just prepare yourself in your mind for that eventuality, so you're not freaking out when it's starting to happen. Other than that, just enjoy your kids and enjoy life. It's just homework.
It's just homework. Josh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. What is the best way for families to connect with you if they want to get in touch with you?
You could go through my website at www.beyondboard.org, board, B-O-R-E-D, or you can email me at josh@beyondboard.org as well.
Wonderful. And I will make sure to put all that information in the show notes. Thank you again for being here. I learned a lot. It's going to help me with my kids as we approach homework in the fall, and so many other parents who are either dealing with homework struggles or need a strategy for approaching homework. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karen.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.